This is a Media Lab podcast. Welcome to Putting It Together, the podcast that goes through the entire body of work of Stephen Sondheim, show by show and song by song. My name is Kyle Marshall, your self-described Sondheim expert. Well, we're here. Sending the Clowns is Sondheim's biggest hit. I'm doing air quotes with my fingers. Certainly it garnered a bunch of widespread radio play once Judy Collins recorded it, and again when Frank Sinatra sang it. It won Sondheim a Grammy for Song of the Year, a feat that no other song in a musical has done since that time. And it still pops up in pop culture. If you're a fan of the podcast My Brother and Me, Justin McElroy often starts shows by singing it. Granted, he knows nothing about the rest of the show, but he knows that song. The band Fish apparently sang the song at their New Year's Eve show in 2019. And who can forget the fact that in the huge box office hit, The Joker, some street thugs sing it to the character, the Joker.
Send in the clowns. Isn't it bliss? Don't you approve?
I'm just impressed they know more than the chorus. These are some ruffians with a deep knowledge of a little night music. So I do hope that you enjoy my conversation with Ashley Pribyl. I always love having her on. Her last appearance was during the Follies season for Losing My Mind. Definitely go back and check out that episode if you haven't. So what I thought I'd do this week is ask the Patreon what their thoughts on this song were. And please let me know if you like this new segment. I think I want to make it a thing. But I got a bunch of great responses. Will mentioned the Golden Girls episode where Blanche figures out her brother is gay because he knows all of the words to Sending the Clowns. Carrie mentions that the song reminded them of their mother. And Barry wrote about how he adores the original version that Glynis Johns sings. And I do as well. I still think it's the best version. But let me read you what Robert wrote. In the early 90s, my late wife and I co-produced a community production of A Little Night Music. For the ticket sales desk, I created a mixtape of renditions of Sending the Clowns, over 100 versions. Over the years, I kept adding additional covers of the song, and it became our song. After her death in 2009, I went to New York twice in 2010 to see the revival with Catherine Zeta-Jones and later Bernadette Peters. Hearing their versions live moved me to tears, especially Bernadette's, who I later learned was also moved to tears at every performance, remembering the loss of her husband. Thank you for sharing that, Robert. I think there is just something special when you get to hear something live and have it mean so much to you in that moment. There's really just nothing like it. I also want to get to a couple of letters. I've noticed that the show seems to be gathering a few new listeners recently, as I've gotten a bunch of messages about people discovering it and listening to the whole back catalog, which is great. But therefore, some mistakes have been noticed, and so I thought it was better late than never to correct myself. So let's talk about the ladies who lunch. So Joseph writes, I just finished listening to the episode about the ladies who lunch, and I wanted to react to a comment that you and your guests made. You seem to be saying that Elaine Stritch didn't get standing ovations for the song until later in her career. Not so when I saw the original Broadway production of Company. The audience did, in fact, rise when she repeats the words over and over at the end of the song. I recall the feeling of that moment very clearly. I, and I'm sure others in the house, felt compelled to stand, commanded to stand. Certainly part of the choice to do so was an appropriate response to Elaine's magnificent performance. So I apologize if that was your experience. Obviously that must have happened while you were there. All I can really say as a rebuttal to that is I'm pretty sure Sondheim himself writes about how the fact that nobody ever stood. Of course, he was not at every single performance either, but maybe that was just during previews. I don't know. I'm basing that information off of something that I know I read about how no one ever stood when this was performed. But I love the fact that you were in an audience where this actually happened, because I think that it's true that you do feel compelled to stand. Like even in that audio recording, the CD recording, it's just like, If Elaine Stritch is yelling at me from the stage to do this, I'm doing it. Let's go all the way back to Gypsy next. James mentions that I listened to episode 5 to see if you mentioned it, but at 22:30, you start to say that in 2008, Boyd Gaines did Nice She Ain't on stage, and he didn't. It was just a bonus track on the CD. I believe none of the cut songs that are on the CD were in the show, just bonus tracks. I don't know how I overlooked that. I even saw that production, so you would think that I would have been able to be like, by the way, this didn't actually get performed, but I have a feeling it must be just me misspeaking, or I honestly thought I saw it and it's just a fever dream of mine, which is not the first time that that has happened. So thank you for everyone to being so attentive. It means that you care, and I care that you care. And maybe at some point I can pull a George Lucas and attempt to make some of those older episodes better. Before we get to my conversation with Ashley, if you'd like to help support the show for absolutely free, you can give a rating and review on whatever app you listen to podcasts in. That is greatly appreciated, and if you'd like to help monetarily, which will only help to grow and make the show better, you can do so over at our Patreon page, and then you can answer some of these questions I post over there. Please do not donate if it impacts you negatively financially. I also need to give a huge thanks to the God That's Good tier from Patreon, the triumphant quartet of Jack, Todd, Barry, and Carrie. And now it's time for Plodding Along. Plodding Along is, of course, the part of the show where I describe what's going on in the plot. The first time Send in the Clowns appears is just before The Miller's Son. Frederick and Desiree meet. Desiree expresses her love. Frederick replies that he does love Desiree, but he cannot separate from Anne. Later in the show, after Anne elopes with Frederick's son Henrik, and also after he almost kills himself playing Russian roulette with Carl Magnus, the Send in the Clowns reprise happens. Frederick is ready to marry Desiree and raise his daughter. In the final moments of the show, Madame Armfeldt points out that the knight has smiled twice, and then she dies. Let me thank some sponsors, and then when we return, it'll be me talking with Ashley Pribyl about Send in the Clowns. Putting It Together is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. The Alberta Podcast Network promotes and supports Alberta-made podcasts and connects their audiences with Alberta-based businesses and organizations. This episode of Putting It Together is brought to you by Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider in Alberta, offering internet, electricity, and natural gas with low rates, awesome service, and profit sharing with local charities. In Alberta, you get to choose who to buy your internet, electricity, and natural gas from. Park Power has low overhead, which in turn allows them to offer low, competitive rates. Reach out for a no-obligations comparison by emailing estimates@parkpower.ca. If you decide to switch, it's easy. It's really just a change to your billing, and you can feel good knowing that you are helping to give back to our communities with your utilities bills. Learn more at parkpower.ca. This week Putting Together is also brought to you by ATB, specifically the Future of Podcast. Today I want to tell you about ATB's new podcast, The Future Of. Join Todd Hirsch, ATB's Vice President and Chief Economist, as he connects with special guests who offer unique and useful perspectives about the future. Explore how our economy and communities can not only brace for change, but embrace the opportunities it creates. From the future of women in business to the changing nature of work itself, The Future Of helps us understand what's coming and what we need to do today to get the tomorrow we want. Featuring 2 episodes each month plus bonus episodes, The Future Of includes interviews with top community and business leaders from Alberta and around the world. Subscribe to The Future Of in the Apple Store, Google Play, Spotify, and everywhere podcasts are found. And connect to ask your questions about the future by emailing thefutureof@atb.com. Ashley, thank you so much for returning back to the show.
Thank you for having me again. I'm always excited to be on here and talk about Sondheim and lyrics, which I love most of all, I think.
Yeah, I love having you on here just because you always bring something new that I hadn't thought of before. So that's always a treat for me. I guess to start off with We were kind of talking about this right before we pushed record, but what is your relationship with A Little Night Music?
So interestingly enough, this and Passion and Assassins, which I was supposed to see at Classic Stage Company last year, are the only ones post company shows I haven't seen in person. And I think it's so weird that I haven't seen A Little Night Music in person because it's probably the most done with maybe Into the Woods of Sondheim shows because it is sort of a more conventional operetta.
Mm-hmm.
I will say I want to just shout out a complaint to my mom, who did see this with Bernadette Peters on Broadway.
Nice.
And did not invite me. And I complained about it to her this morning and she just goes, yeah, I did. So clearly she doesn't feel bad at all.
She feels justified in some way for excluding you. That's too bad. I guess something that I want to bring up, you were talking about how this is the one that you aren't as tied to necessarily, like when you go through Company Follies and some of the other like Prince Sondheim collaborations. Why do you think that is?
I think for me, this is A Little Night Music is really an extremely conventional operetta in a lot of ways. It has a fairly predictable plot and it lacks, I won't say it lacks, but it's definitely, I'll say, more positive maybe, or a little bit more upbeat, which isn't my thing for sure.
I want to be depressed at the end of the night at the theater every time.
Pretty much. No, that's not true. So I actually do love operetta. And I will say this, I'm going to go on a slight tangent for a second, but, a lot of people don't realize this, but we were actually just talking about early musical theater, and early Broadway operetta was actually the most popular genre. So when we think about like the 1920s, we think about Gershwin and maybe early, Rodgers and Hart, maybe. Mm-hmm. But in reality, the shows that people were going to see were the Sigmund Romberg operettas. The Student Prince, which is probably one of my favorite operettas, was the most popular show in the 1920s. So in a way, this is sort of going with what Sondheim was doing in Follies, but in kind of a different direction. So we get that one operetta number in Follies, One More Kiss, mm-hmm. But that's it. And then now here we're getting a full-fledged operetta, which I really find fascinating.
Do you have any insight as to why he chose to do it that way? Like, was that a Prince decision? Was that him just wanting to experiment a little bit? Like, do you know who it was that said we should try like basically operetta format?
I honestly don't know, but I have a feeling it was Sondheim and Prince together, just because they both clearly had an interest in this earlier form of musicals and looking back. But it's interesting because we were talking a little bit about before we started. I think of this Follies and Company as almost a trilogy. And I know the ages don't work out, but I sometimes think of it as 35, 45, 55, but that is not correct. I guess maybe because I was exposed to this when I was younger, I always think of Desiree as much older than she is. Yeah. Because they're all sort of about aging and they're all sort of about regret. And Company has this really open end. Obviously, it's notoriously open-ended. And then Follies, of course, ends with everyone just sad and regretful, but going back. So it kind of has that natural trilogy feel. And then A Little Night Music sort of ties it up really nicely. So it's almost like I tried and then I tried again and then I finally was successful. And I don't know, maybe part of it too is, wanting to really take those themes to their full extent so that it's not just open-ended like we get at the end of Follies or we get at the end of Company, but we can actually see that, maybe it's not always too late, which of course is the song we're talking about today.
I mean, I wonder also too, because it is based on a movie, and I know like Company is based off of like a couple of one-act plays, but I mean, I feel like that's a little bit more malleable, and especially Follies, which is kind of an original work in a way that they felt constrained to. Like from what I read, Sondheim wanted to go very Follies, not very 3-act structure to this show and was basically shot down. It's like, we're not doing that. By James Goldman. He was like, we're going to do like straight, or not James Goldman. Oh my gosh. Who wrote the book to Little Night Music?
Wheeler?
Hugh Wheeler. Hugh Wheeler said, absolutely not. We're not going to do that. So,
well, it's interesting because when I think of Sondheim, really the shows to me that have sort of the closed endings that are like satisfactory and traditional are this one and Sweeney Todd.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's really it. Sorry, I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
And those are both written with Hugh Wheeler and both very closely based on pre-existing source material. We'll talk about Sweeney Todd, I'm sure. It's my favorite. You've seen my tattoo.
Yeah.
They both have these sort of traditional, one tragic, one comic ending to them that is really satisfying, I think. Mm-hmm. But they are tied to the source material in the way that really none of his other shows are. I mean, even ones based on real events, Pacific Overtures and Assassins, are structured in such a way that they're still extremely open.
Yeah, like they're not a very, like, let's tie this up in a bow. Here's our moral that you get to go home with. Yeah.
Right. Let me tell you, I have an article on Pacific Overtures coming out soon, and writing a summary of that show.
Yeah.
I don't even know where to start. But yeah, so I think of this show as really very different from anything Sondheim did beforehand, except maybe, I guess Forum has that comedic farce to it. Yeah,
that's the closest.
I shouldn't say this, but I don't really think of Forum as a Sondheim show.
Oh, throwing shade over here.
Not in a bad way, Justin. It's so different from anything else in his mature style, I guess.
Well, yeah, it definitely is not... he had not yet found his voice. I think he's very open about that too. That's like he had not really discovered exactly who he wanted to be as a musical theater writer. That being said, we are going to be talking about the song "Send in the Clowns" today, which has become his most popular and enduring hit, which is surprising even to Stephen Sondheim. So we get to try and break that apart as much as we can. If you can recall, like, when was the first time you heard this song?
I will say I was very daunted when you said that we were doing this one. I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
I have to say something smart about the most well-known Sondheim song. This is terrifying. I think when I was little is the first time I remember. And I just remember being like, I don't understand why this song is about clowns. It doesn't sound funny at all. Yeah. That was my child response. And I didn't really revisit it until I was older. And then it became a song I really loved because it was so melancholic, which, I don't know, maybe as a teenager, we all love melancholy.
You're right.
Or at least I did. I mean, my go-to angst teenage album was Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette. So that'll tell you a little bit. But, which I guess it's more angry than melancholic. But this one is lovingly melancholic and is probably one of the few Sondheim songs I can actually play on the piano. So I also liked it because of that. I didn't understand it when I first heard it. And I find it interesting that it became so popular because I feel like, unlike some of his other songs, it is still so deeply connected to the moment.
Yeah.
The one that I'm always surprised didn't become big is actually Good Thing Going, which of course is written diegetically to be a pop hit, but it's also just a great song. Yeah. And so the fact that this one that I feel is much more tied to the situation became the one that became, I don't know, the breakaway pop hit, I guess would be.
I'm shocked that Perpetual Anticipation didn't become the pop standard of the day, but yeah, it's so interesting that you bring that up. Sondheim writes in his book Finishing the Hat about that specifically, very in lengthy detail. Of like, you really cannot predict what is going to be like this big breakaway hit. Sometimes it just gets away from you, sort of thing. And even this song, it actually took a couple years for it to really find its way into becoming a pop hit with the Judy Collins version specifically.
Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? Me here at last on the ground.
But there are other songs that Sondheim has written that confuse me that they didn't somehow break out into our release. And I think part of that is because like rock and roll was becoming more influential. And so there's all these other factors, I think, that are getting wrapped up in that. But it still is interesting that there weren't other ones that broke out huge.
I mean, I think a lot of it is timing. Like, this is the end of, I mean, he even says in Finishing the Hat, I think, that this was the last musical song to be nominated for a Grammy. I don't think that's true anymore, maybe.
I tried to do a quick search. I don't know about nominated. It's definitely the last one that won for Song of the Year. Yeah.
That won, sorry.
It's definitely the last one that won for Song of the Year. But I'm actually somewhat surprised that stuff like Dear Evan Hansen, even stuff from Hamilton, didn't have crossover people adapt it. Anyways, maybe that's just because I'm such into like musical theater. It's like, of course, this could be a pop hit. And Well,
I think part of it is our relationship to covers versus originals has changed significantly. So, you know, this is sort of the end of the era. I mean, it's overlapping, obviously. We go all the way back to the 50s where we get like the singer-songwriter, sort of this need for authenticity to exist between sort of the singer and what they're singing. And we're starting to move away from covers. And really, when you think about it, who does covers now, you know?
Right.
Every once in a while, like I Love Cake, they're one of my favorite bands, and they'll do a cover of a song. But really, covers aren't going to win Song of the Year.
Right.
There are some nice versions. I think of like, is it This Is Me from The Greatest Showman?
Right. Yep.
Like that could have been one. I feel like, I mean, Pasek and Paul do a great job of just writing hit after hit after hit.
I don't ridiculous.
So I do think there is potential for this to happen, but I don't know if it'll ever be a cover again.
You know, as you were talking about that, it immediately made me flash back. There was that period of time in like Disney animated history where there would be the song that was sung in the context of the movie, and then over the closing credits was the pop singer singing it, and I always hated the version that played over the credits. Like, that's not what it sounds like in the movie. So yeah, maybe there's probably something to that.
Yeah, because I think Christina Aguilera did the cover of Reflections from Mulan, and I remember that one being a really big hit that got played on the radio even.
Yeah. Bette Midler did the Beauty and the Beast one. And I like Bette Midler. I just really dislike the way that they orchestrated the pop version of that song.
Well, it's not Angela Lansbury.
I think that's also part of it. It's like, you have Angela Lansbury. You can't get better than that. I just have to say quickly, the first time I encountered this song was actually through parody. And it is the small appearance it makes in an episode of The Simpsons when Krusty the Clown sings "Send in the Clowns."
Oh, do tell. I have to hear these lyrics.
Oh, God. He's like, he's like super says like, "Send in the clowns, those laffy daffy clowns," or something like that. So he like changes the lyrics to make it sound like a little bit more upbeat, and then he like breaks down crying.
Send in the clowns, those daffy laffy clowns. Send in those soulful and doleful schmaltz by the bowlful clowns. Send in the clowns.
They're already here.
So that's literally the first time I heard that. And then when I was, of course, getting into my like Sondheim fanaticism as a teenager, of course, I picked up Company and A Little Night Music were like the two purchases I purchased at the same time. And that's when I heard this, like, oh, it's the Simpsons thing. That was like my immediate thought. And I think kind of like you was like, I don't know if I understand exactly what she's talking about, because I, like an idiot, also thought that they meant clowns literally as like a circus clown. Sondheim goes into detail about this. Is like, I think it's very obvious that I mean fools in the theatrical version of a clown, not like an actual physical clown. I'm like, I agree, but I don't think I heard that term necessarily as a teenager yet. So I just thought of clown as like Ronald McDonald or that sort of thing.
Well, I also think too, and we can talk about this when we get closer, but there's kind of other circus imagery or things that can be read as circus imagery into the song. you in midair, I always think of like a trapeze artist. Like these are the things that come. So I think it's hard to argue that.
Well, I mean, I guess that's true because I mean, why don't we do this? Let me read out the first two stanzas of this song, and then we'll kind of delve into it because I think you were right in that you can kind of have this double reading into it. Desiree sings, "Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? Me here at last on the ground, you in midair. Send in the clowns. Isn't it bliss? Don't you approve? One who keeps tearing around, one who can't move. Where are the clowns? Send in the clowns."
Isn't it rich? Are we a pair? Me here at last on the ground, you in midair. Send in the clowns. Isn't it bliss? Don't you approve? One who keeps tearing around, one who can't move. Where are the clowns? Send in the clowns.
I feel like my childhood was just weird in what like my cultural references were because I grew up watching a lot of stuff that my parents had taped off of television. And one of those things was like the original Dumbo. And so there's clowns and stuff in that too. The clowns were sent in to like, you know, make people half and laughy as they like roped up things and like cleaned off the stage and stuff like that. So I think what you were kind of getting at here before is true, is that if someone had thought of it in that context, I don't necessarily think the lyrics disprove that reading.
Well, and I don't think it's necessarily, like I know sometimes says, oh, I meant fools, but it's a really rich metaphor if you want to talk about it that way too, because there is obviously with Desiree's profession, it's all about theatricality, right? And it's all about the theater. And what is the circus if not a theater, right? And so there's, I think, sort of because I think even to original ideas of pantomimes and puppetry and all these early forms of theater also had clowns, right? And so I don't think they're as disconnected as they appear now. I also think there's an irony, right? Because if we're thinking of clowns as fools, we don't get that whole like clowns are also supposed to be happy. And he's clearly has this, you know, isn't this rich? Isn't this bliss? You know, I know we're going to get to those lines. I'm sorry. I should have printed up. It's like, aren't you happy? Aren't you happy?
Yeah. Why
aren't you happy? Where are the clowns? Right. So it is a way that there is this irony, this sarcasm, this farce. Shouldn't you be laughing at the absolute irony of this situation, which is, now I'm ready to be with you and you have someone else.
Well, yeah, I think this is why as I get older, I keep coming back to this song. And, you know, it is so well known now, so covered now. And so it's probably a little bit like populist to be like, I love this song. But there is something bittersweet and tragic about this, where like if you are in a play or you are in a circus, it's like, yeah, it's time to send in the clowns and everyone get happy. But I am deeply sad right now because that's what the music is telling you. It's like, I am not happy. I'm glad that you, Frederick, are happy with your young wife. But I have just realized that we should be together. And oh, by the way, you have a daughter. You know, like it's such a you feel for her so much in this moment that it's hard not to be like, yeah, there's this tragedy while she's talking about let there be happiness, basically.
And I think, you know, this fear that she's talking about in this song is a real one, you know, that a lot of us have, that we've met the person we're supposed to be with and we didn't recognize it, right? And now it's too late. Not to throw personal anecdotes in, but I mean, this is my sister, so she's about to get married, but she and the guy she dated, they dated 10 years ago or more, broke up and then got back together. Now they're getting married.
Right.
So this is a real thing that happens, but I think it's also a fear of people's that, they made the wrong decision. Right. And I mean, that's Follies too. Follies is, I always want to call her Dorothy, but it's not Dorothy. It's Sally.
Yeah.
Did Sally make the wrong choice? Did she choose wrong? Did Ben choose wrong?
Well, that's what I'm thinking of. Like, there's interesting threads that you can pull towards like Follies and the Little Night Music together, because it feels like in Follies, the consensus by the end seems to be, or at least the characters come to the decision that you cannot change your decisions from the past. When you have made a decision, you have to stick with the consequences. And in the Little Night Music is a little bit different. It's like you can make a choice, have the consequences, but you could also come back and like relitigate that if you need to. Like, nothing is set in stone to such a degree that you cannot rework it later on.
Right. And I also think of this too as sort of the someone is waiting in company. Like, it's also that one, because the whole fear that Bobby has is that what if that person doesn't wait, right? At the end, I'll hurry, wait, I'll hurry, And so he's also afraid of that. And so this fear of missing the person is one that goes through all these shows.
Right.
But this one gives you a little hope that maybe if you did, it's not too late.
What do you think about this? Like, there is this one part of the lyric that goes, one who keeps tearing around, one who can't move. I personally have always read that, of her talking about them specifically, but the one that keeps tearing around is her, and the one who can't move is him, unless you have a very different interpretation of that.
That's funny. I think of it as the other way around. The
way I see this is because it even opens up kind of that way with the stage version of A Glamorous Life, where you see her like whipping around. She kind of leaves her daughter back and she's constantly in movement. Whereas Frederick seems to be stuck in this situation where he can't really progress. Like, he's in this relationship that really isn't a romantic relationship as much as he's trying to make that be a thing. So he can't move on to the next step. So it's very metaphorical the way I'm looking at this. So that's why I keep looking at it that way.
I think of it the other way. And I guess I'm like seeing it from Desiree's point of view, because I don't, I know Desiree knows at this point that things are not great for Frederick. Yeah. This way that Frederick's been able to move on and get married, and she's still living this life that she was living before. And she hasn't progressed forward. Like, yes, her career has progressed forward, but in her personal life, she's sort of stuck.
Right.
And she can't get out. And so I think of it as that way. And I wonder if there's like a gender thing to that.
Right. Yeah.
But I find that really interesting, because when I think of it of Desiree's point of view, it does look like Frederick's moved forward, right? He's moved on, and she's still hung up on him.
Yeah. Well, she continues on. And she sings, just when I'd stopped opening doors, finally knowing the one that I wanted was yours, making my entrance again with my usual flair, sure of my lines, no one is there.
Just when I'd stopped opening doors, finally knowing the one that I wanted was yours. Making my entrance again with my usual flair, sure of my life, no one is there.
I can't help but think, we keep bopping around as far as like other Sondheim shows, but Opening Doors does come back in Merrily We Roll Along, so that's kind of instantly what I think about there. I don't know. Again, this is because maybe I've had past relationships, but the one that really cuts me deep is like finally knowing the one that I wanted was yours, as in relation to the doors that she's opening and stuff like that. But it's like, I don't know, a very astute, introspective lyric that is like, feels very lived in at the same time. Sondheim seems to be the master of that, about using, yes, metaphors, but also being like so emotionally true that it like cuts deep.
Yeah, these lines are the ones where I start wanting to cry.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a metaphor, but I think you're right. It's a metaphor that has all of this emotion behind it, and also really paints a picture. So, making my entrance again with my usual flair, sure of my lines, no one is there. Like, I can imagine her opening the door, full, whatever, ready to say to an empty audience. Right. And that is the feeling, right? I'm so ready to love. I'm ready to commit. I'm ready to have this relationship with you.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're gone.
Yeah.
Right. And so what do I do? What do I do now? Right. And that's the feeling of this whole song, I think.
I'm not 100% sure Sondheim means it this way. From your understanding of reading the show, Desiree, is she playing to packed houses, or are they kind of like half filled, like not as popular as she once was? Because I've kind of seen it both ways sort of portrayed. I don't know if this is a callback. Like, I'm sure my lines and just like what I'm doing right now, I'm playing to no one. That's how it feels like our relationship. I'm opening the store and there's no one there. But I don't know if that's the tie-in that he's kind of trying to make as well.
I've always thought of it as her career is definitely waning and she knows it, whether she's playing to pack houses or not. I mean, this is something that I think Follies delves into as well, which is for women, there is an expiration date for most women in terms of acting, whether we like it or not, with exceptions, of course, right? But what makes those exceptions like Meryl Streep and Judi Dench so great is all the attractive younger women who weren't Judi Dench or Meryl Streep. And so I think she knows, and in some ways that's what's pushing her to reevaluate what she's doing.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I do think of her still as a very accomplished actress and one who is confident in what she's doing. And here she has this moment of vulnerability in this song where she's not confident. This is where she's opening up, where she's being vulnerable in a way that she's not for most of her life.
Right.
And that's what makes these lines, I think, so powerful. Is this isn't the her we see throughout the rest of the show.
Right. Yeah. She's done kind of putting on that face. She continues on, though, saying, "Don't you love farce? My fault, I fear. I thought you'd want what I want. Sorry, my dear. But where are the clowns? Quick, send in the clowns. Don't bother. They're here."
Don't you love the farce? My fault, I fear. I thought that you'd want what I want. Sorry, my dear. But where are the clowns? Quick, send in the clowns. Don't bother, they're here.
I've never understood the line, "My fault, I fear." Why is she blaming herself? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I don't have a great answer for you, I don't think. Like, from context, what I feel she is referring to here is this meta-narrative that's going on. So we have this knowledge as the audience that she has this daughter fathered by Frederick, but Frederick doesn't know that he has a daughter. Like, this is gearing up into that farcical entertainment. Mm-hmm. And I think she in part blames herself for not coming clean years ago about what happened with their relationship. That's as best I can do, to be honest with you.
I mean, I'm not going to say it's totally out of character, because I do think women tend to blame themselves for a lot of things that maybe aren't necessarily blamable. But I do find it interesting that she is taking on sort of a burden of, and I mean, maybe she should, right? I do think you're right in that she did have this child and made her decisions and decided to not tell him. But at the same time, I mean, if he really wanted, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's complicated, right?
Yeah, super complicated.
Which is Sondheim. Even he can make an operetta complicated. So,
well, I guess to further that conversation a little bit, like the very last line of that stanza is "Don't bother, they're here," which is she saying that they're the clowns in this, or is the metaphorical clown surrounding them?
I always thought this was where the song made sense to me. Like, when I finally understood it, I always thought it was them.
Yeah.
Right. They're the clowns because they're the fools. And this is where it does mean fools. Right. So for me, there is this whole theatrical circus metaphor, whether Sondheim wants it or not, or even whether he consciously meant it. I don't care. I think of it as a clever, because here then we are moving to this new definition of clowns, where it is like, yeah, we're the fools. We're the ones who have made this huge mistake. And now we're stuck in it. Because I mean, yeah, we talk about the show being the like, we're not stuck anymore, but here she thinks she is, right? She thinks she's stuck.
Yeah.
She thinks she can't go back. And that's what, so she's like, yeah, we made this huge mistake. We were fools about it when we were younger. And now here we are.
Mm-hmm.
Ha ha ha. Funny.
Yeah, right. One thing I was going to mention this at the beginning and I blew past it, but I also think that the music that is supporting most of this song works so well because, well, I mean, it definitely starts with those woodwind instruments, so there is that kind of mournful sound to it. I wish I could by ear identify instruments really well. I think it's a clarinet in most renditions of this, or an oboe potentially, but I'm pretty sure it's a clarinet.
It's a clarinet,
okay,
I think, too. I haven't heard it in the original.
Well, what's worse is that I played clarinet for 6 years, so you would think I'd be able to know by just listening to it, but it's still a struggle sometimes. But yeah, like that sadness just permeates just the underscoring of this song really, really well. And this is where we can crescendo into this final bit where she sings, "Isn't it rich? Isn't it queer? Losing my timing this late in my career. And where are the clowns? There ought to be clowns. Well, maybe next year."
Isn't it rich? Isn't it queer? Losing my timing this late in my career. And where are the clowns? There ought to be clowns. Well, maybe next year.
I'm pretty sure you could probably write an entire dissertation on the word choice of next year in this lyric, because I think that's very telling. And I think Sondheim writes about this somewhere too. I was reading it's not this year, it's next year. She's saying that this, like, I've thrown away my shot for this entire year, so next year I'm going to make something better. Anyways, I always find it interesting that that's the word choice that they went with.
It's so interesting because I'm thinking now of all the ways that I have made this a circus metaphor in my mind, whether I like it or not. And for me, it's like, well, the circus only comes once a year. Right. This is how I always thought of it, right? So it's like, so there's no clowns this year, but maybe next year, maybe next time. And in a way, this sort of like this line is so interesting because it's in direct contrast to the "don't bother, they're here." Yeah. Right. Yeah. So is it like, are they here? Aren't they here? I don't understand, but I think in a way it is sort of, if we're using this metaphor, right? And so the "don't bother, they're here" is when we're moving outside the metaphor, and then this is like we're back into the metaphor. Yeah. Or maybe this is where the clowns are supposed to represent happiness. So maybe clowns has switched meaning in this stanza to now clowns are supposed to represent happiness or foolishness of love. You know, there's all these different ways of reading it, but I think it is strange to me. These two lines have never really, I won't say made sense, but they've always been sort of contrasting in my mind because are the clowns here or aren't they here? I don't know. Well, I don't know.
I think maybe this just popped into my head. I think what might be telling about this stanza specifically is inside the show, like there is a scene between that second last and last stanza, Frederick talking about it, and it's like, I'm choosing my wife, and he leaves. And so this is now just her by herself singing this last part instead of to another person. So yeah, I think this is like an admission to herself.
Right. And I think I love that line too, losing my timing this late in my career. Yeah. There's something about that line that is very Sondheim. Again, with that metaphor that also has all this deep meaning underneath, where maturity is supposed to bring wisdom and better things, but for her, it's just bringing regret and a realization of regret. So unlike, say, in Into the Woods, where maturity I feel is really prized.
Right.
Here in Follies, it's much more of a detriment because you're just realizing all maturity is, well, I won't say all, but maturity is partly realizing all the mistakes that you've made.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, it's also interesting, like, as far as within Sondheim's career, like these shows are being written when he's a younger man at the least in his 30s, and then Into the Woods is much later. He would be in his 50s, something like that, when he wrote that show. So you take that for what it's worth too, like the different ends of his understanding of what maturity actually means.
I think too it is interesting because I think of these shows as about aging and age. And so Sondheim is 40 when he writes Company. So he's 43, 44 when he's writing this one. And that is sort of middle age, right? That is the moment that we're not in our 20s anymore. A lot of doors are closed now. I say this as someone who's about to hit mid-30s. Oops. So The Bell Jar is one of my favorite books. And there's this scene in The Bell Jar where Sylvia Plath, I mean, it's not her, but it's her, if you know anything about this book, is sitting in a tree. It's a fig tree. And she talks about this fig tree and how each fig represents a different life that you could have. And she's sitting in this fig tree and she can't decide which one she wants to eat. And while she's paralyzed, not deciding, and maybe this is why I think of Desiree also as the one who can't move, while she's paralyzed deciding which one she wants to eat, they're all rotting and falling to the ground because time is passing and the different opportunities are leaving. And once you choose one, then you can't choose another one. And I guess the point of A Little Night Music is once you choose one, you can still choose another one, right? But at the same time, you never get those years back, right? You never get those ones that fell to the ground back again. I'm depressed now.
Well, I think we've uncovered exactly why this has become the most popular song that Sondheim ever wrote. I
mean, it is quintessential Sondheim in its depressiveness.
Yeah, exactly.
So, this isn't a Cole Porter hit.
Well, there's a few different things we have to do here. First and foremost, as far as versions of this song go, it has been recorded over 500 times, as far as I can figure out. What is your favorite version of this song?
I like the Barbra Streisand one.
Yeah.
I'm old-fashioned that way, I guess.
What a surprise! Who could foresee I'd come to feel about you what you felt about me? Why only now when I see that you've drifted away? What a surprise! What a cliche.
I know they exist, and I would love to hear maybe some more, I'll say radical reinterpretations of this. I haven't sought them out yet, but no, maybe I want to now that you mentioned this.
Yeah.
Because I do like generic crossings.
I will say, most of the ones that I've listened to, like it's, same melody and everything like that. They're not trying to radically reinterpret the song. The Streisand one is interesting because Sondheim writes about this, about how she was smart enough to understand that because in a song you don't get that scene with Frederick, that you kind of need this bridge between those last two stanzas to understand the emotion that's happening. So she adds in, what a surprise, who could foresee I'd come to feel about you what you felt about me. Why only now when I see that you've drifted away? What a surprise, what a cliche. Sondheim did write those lyrics, by the way. He wrote them for her, which is kind of interesting. What I find fascinating is Sondheim's admission that by and large, he prefers the original person who sang the song. So for him, it's always been Glynis Johns. He writes the following here. I almost always prefer the original to every other stage and recording artist. I use prefer because it's a matter of emotion rather than judgment. The first performance of a song I've never heard before, whether my own or someone else's, tends to be not only the definitive one, but also the one I want to live with. Deeply moving as Judi Dench's cello voice performance of this song was in the British Royal National Theatre revival of the show, I'll always hear Glynis's flute. Barbara Cook singing In Buddy's Eyes is art song quality of the highest order, but it's Dorothy Collins who sang it in Follies whom I hear when I think of it. Lee Remick was an actress first and a singer second, but her version of Anyone Can Whistle is the one I would take to the proverbial desert island. The notion that first love is the best can pertain not just to human relationships. What an interesting, what a beautiful way to put that, I think.
It's definitely made me question my preferences for songs. So like the first Oklahoma I ever listened to was the one with Hugh Jackman, and that's still my favorite, even though it doesn't have Lonely Room in it, which is tragic. And thinking about like being alive, you know, the first one I heard was Raul Esparza, and that is my favorite. However, I think I can also talk about some actual musical evidence as to why that one is my favorite.
Which is?
The grain of his voice is so, I mean, he's a very intense actor.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And it adds something to this song a lot. I do like the Dean Jones version. I'm writing about this in my book a little bit, but the Larry Kurt version, which a lot of people don't know, but there is this recording that exists. I don't know if you talked about this on the Being Alive episode.
Yeah, actually on some CD releases, like the one that I have, the Larry Kurt one is actually included as a bonus track.
Oh, fun. Yeah, I own the British one. I bought it. Yeah, eBay. Thank you. He actually sings the written rhythms, and it sounds so weird because Dean Jones does not, and that is the recording that everyone has followed since then. So Larry Kurt sounds weird, even though it's actually closer to Sondheim's intent. So I think there is something to be said about that too, is the one you listen to first is the one that becomes the normal.
Yeah.
And everything becomes a variation on that normal.
Yeah, it's so true. Like there is deep debates, not a Sondheim show, I know, but there's deep debates on what version of Les Mis that you like, because I listened to the Broadway version first. That's just the voices I hear in my head when I think about that show. But some people will, like, to their dying day, like, no, the British one or the London version is far superior in every way. But that's I don't
know. That's I shouldn't say this, but that is a show that I think is fine, but a soundtrack that I will never listen to on its own. There's a few numbers I'll listen to, but it doesn't work for me as terms of just listening at home.
I mean, yes, guns going off and storming the barricades does not make like
it's
passive
just a
listening.
Little bit, it's just too repetitive for me, I think. Whereas something like, I'm trying to think, what are ones I listen to that aren't Sondheim all the way through? You know, Oklahoma, Greatest Showman, lots of mid 40s ones. But yeah, so I do think there's something to be said about the first one you hear being the definitive one. That's not always the case. No. So like the version of It's Priest, a little priest. I was like, I'm just singing the song in my head now. That I like the best is Patti LuPone, but in concert with George Hearn.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But it's because I like a very funny Mrs. Lovett. I like her as the comedic relief, and I feel like all the other ones are too serious. Angela Lansbury is fine. She's not serious at all. No. She's great. But there's something about that one with Patti LuPone that's over the top and overly theatrical that I know will grate on some people like crazy, but I love.
No, fair enough. The other thing here is that there is a reprise of this song at the very, very end of the show. And so just to state this out here, Desiree goes, "Isn't it rich?" And Frederick goes, "Are we a pair? You hear it last on the ground." And then Desiree says, "You in midair. Was that a farce?" Frederick, "My fault, I fear." Desiree, "Me as a merry-go-round. Me as a merry-go-round." Frederick, "Me as King Lear. Make way for the clowns." Desiree, "Applause for the clowns." And then they both come together and sing, "They're finally here."
Isn't it rich?
Are we a pair. You here at last on the ground.
You in midair. Was that a farce?
My fault, I fear.
Me as a merry-go-round.
Me as King Lear. Make way for the clowns.
Applause for the clowns.
They're finally
So you mentioned about a lyric that you don't quite understand. I have to mention a lyric that I don't quite understand in this reprise, which is Frederick saying, me as King Lear. And I don't get why. Because maybe I'm misremembering King Lear, but nothing he does in this show reminds me of that role.
I have the same question, and I just wonder how much of it is like me. I don't know, because I also was looking at that line, prepping for this, and yeah, it's one that doesn't make sense to me either. I don't know if it's just like me as an actor, right? Me as
maybe just thinking of a famous role or something, yeah.
Right, because King Lear, although I guess King Lear has regrets.
Right, yeah.
Right? That's the whole thing, is regret. I mean, in some way, I guess there are some thematic similarities if you want to talk about having regrets when you're older about how you treated people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in this moment, it's like, it doesn't seem right to be doing that, because that's a tragedy. And it seems like what's happening to me in the reprise, which is one of the things I actually like about this reprise a lot, is he's taking all those lines that were sarcastic and making them not sarcastic, right? Are we a pair? Not, we're a pair in that we're just both so sad.
Right.
Right. Right. No, it's like, we're a pair now. Woo, party. Which you don't get to do very much in Sondheim. But so the idea that is a tragic character doesn't really work for me here. And I just wonder if he's just going with, some sort of acting theatrical metaphor. Because I know that Sondheim's not going to do anything casually.
Right.
Right. He didn't choose this line casually. I don't think he chooses any line casually. So I really wish there had been more of him talking about this line. But
I know it seems such a. It's
especially because
I was just gonna say it stands out so much to me because it's like, is it him just referencing some Shakespearean play because he knows that Desiree is an actress, or is there something else that I'm just not picking up on that's so obvious?
Right. And I love Shakespeare, so I feel like I should be picking up on this one.
Yeah.
But I'm not. But I do wonder if it's just that there is a way that King Lear is similar in that it is about regret and about regretting decisions in the past. I never thought of this, but maybe King Lear is maybe sort of what happens if you are stubborn and keep going rather than making the decision to go backwards. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there now.
So someone can write in and let me know if they have some deep-seated analysis for that. Here's the last thing I think that we should do, which is this is the last episode of the songs that we're going to be talking about this season. So we should play a little game called How Many Tonys Did This Win? This is the 1973 season. To give you a bit of a fighting chance, I will let you know that the following musicals were also nominated this year. So this is the season of course, A Little Night Music, but also a show called Don't Bother Me, I Can't Cope. I have no idea, to be brutally honest, what that is. But this is also the year of Pippin and Sugar. Do you know about Sugar at all?
Yeah, it was on my comps, but I don't remember that
it's
much about
it's an
it.
adaptation of Some Like It Hot. It's the musical version of Some Like It Hot. which has a lot of defenders out there actually of like loving that musical a whole lot. Anyway, so
Well, I love Some Like It Hot.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite movies
great
of
movie.
all time.
uh,
On Billy Wilder's headstone, it says, I'm a writer, but nobody's perfect.
I like that. That's so funny. But Pippin was probably like the biggest challenger here this year. So first off, I'll ask this question. How many Tonys was A Little Night Music nominated for, do you think? Or do you know off the top of your head?
I don't. There are ones, if you asked me, I could maybe hazard a guess. I'm already guessing which ones Pippin won for, that it didn't, choreography being one. I could be wrong on that, but I'm going to go with, now I'm trying to remember what even were the categories back then versus now.
Yeah, I don't know if there's any different ones at this point, but yeah, I don't know.
I'm going to say 8.
So it was nominated for 12 that year. So Best Musical, Best Book, Best Original Score, Best Actor for Len Cariou, Best Actress for Glynis Johns, Best Featured Actor for Laurence Guittard, and then Best Featured Actress for Patricia Elliott and Hermione Gingold, Best Costume Design, Best Scenic Design, Best Lighting Design, Best Direction of a Musical. So here's a follow-up question then. How many did it win?
I'm pretty sure it won Best Musical, so I'm just going to start there. I'm going to go with my original answer and say 8.
No, but you're pretty close. It won 6.
Oh.
So yeah, it kind of went back and forth with Pippin throughout the night. For those who might not know, Bob Fosse was like the big choreography and director of Pippin, which he won both for that night, in fact. So Harold Prince did not win Best Director for this show. The ones that did win, though, it won for Best Costume Design. It won for Best Featured Actress for Patricia Elliott. Glynis Johns won for Best Lead Actress. Sondheim won for Best Score. Hugh Wheeler won for Best Book. And then it won Best Musical as well. So those are the ones that won.
And the winner is A Little Night Music.
This has to be shared with Harold Hastings, our musical director, who keeps the show spinning every night, with Jonathan Tunick, who, as is his wont, has surpassed even himself with the most extraordinary orchestrations in theater history, with a low bow to Ingmar Bergman, who made it all possible, and also with Hal Prince, who directed with unmatched freshness and brilliance.
Yeah, I was thinking, I don't think Len Cariou won because that role in Pippin is just too heavy. I'm just thinking.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to see.
I love Pippin,
yeah.
so
yeah, Ben Vereen won that year for Best Lead Actor, which is, to be honest with you, probably more justified if you're comparing those two performances.
I mean, 2 performances and 2 roles. You can only play the role you're given, and Frederick is fine.
Yeah, it's no Sweeney Todd, though. Come on.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Actually, thank you so much for joining me here today. I mean, you mentioned your book a couple of times. I know it's not out or anything like that, but maybe you should just maybe explain a little bit about what that book is. And then if people wanted to stay in contact with you, how can they do so?
Yeah, so I'm writing a book about company. It's, of course, like everything got delayed because of the pandemic pretty significantly. I'm still doing the research. So I have to wait for the archives to open again. But it's called, as of right now, 50 Years of Company, Exploring Gender, Sexuality, and Marriage Through an American Musical. So it's really an exploration of how company and its revivals really reflect this extreme shift in understandings of marriage that have happened really since the feminist movement and the sexual revolution all the way to the present. And it goes up into the 2020 gender swapped version on Broadway, which I was lucky enough to see before it closed. Sorry, brag.
I know. I was literally a week away and they shut everything down.
I was so lucky. I also got to go see that Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I went and saw that the night before. Oh my God. I love that play so much. Yeah. Anyway, and it has a whole different resonance now that I've been in the academic world a little bit. Okay. But that's that's a whole nother podcast that I would love to do. I love Albie. But yeah, so I'm working on that. I'm hoping to have it under contract by the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So it should be out, I'll say 3 years and be optimistic.
All right.
But I do have an article also coming out. This one should be out by the end of the year in a book called Sondheim in His Time and Ours. And my article specifically is looking at Pacific overtures and collaboration, representation, and politics. So it's looking specifically at representations of Asian and Asian Americanness in the show. It's sort of half of a dissertation chapter, and then I hope to get the other half out, which is about the difficulties Harold Prince had in casting the show and the relationship he had with Asian American theater organizations in New York. And issues with immigration and visas and equity. But that's a whole nother issue.
Well, that is going to be a very, very quickly going to be our next season. So, I mean, yes, we'll be getting into all those.
I'm really excited. Please call me. So if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter at Pribyl, Pribble, Prabble. Same on Instagram. And I currently work at the Missouri Symphony. And I'm actually about to launch my own podcast from there called Mosey Motifs. And our first season is going to be about the Black Indigenous musician of color experience in classical music. So
interesting. That's great.
That'll be out soon too.
Perfect. Thank you, Ashley.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. You can send emails to puttingittogetherpodcast@gmail.com. Also, you can follow Sondheim Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/puttingittogetherpodcast. Thank you to the Alberta Podcast Network, to Park Power, and to ATB this week. Putting It Together is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and pretty much anywhere you can get podcasts from. Consider subscribing so that you never miss an episode. Next week, we'll be talking about all the different recordings of A Little Night Music. And also, we'll be listening to every single version of Send in the Clowns. That is a lie. As always, a big thanks to the great Chris Taniguchi, who designed the podcast artwork, and to Nick Driscoll for composing our theme music. Well, we've reached the end of our episode. Yes, I know. Goodbye for now.
Flirt with rescue when one has no intention of being saved. Do you try to